talking, has been running this project since for the last couple of years since Amy came on board. But I guess it was the initial idea around the project was there's been a lot of work done on adult sheep, and then quite a bit investment in ewe lambs or ewe hoggets, depending on which country you're living in, but joining at sort of 7 to 9 months of age. Had a fair bit of research interest as well and work. But the actual sort of typical maiden, the 19-month-old maiden mating, which is obviously more of a merino system or some parts of, or those systems that don't allow hogget mating or ewe lamb mating. So that was the kind of initial idea of the project, and was trying to understand, I guess, nutritional management of maiden ewes and how much, where the economic optimum was. So that was kind of the idea around the project. Amy will run you through kind of what we did in the project. It's been a PDS funded by Meat and Livestock Australia. So PDS stands for Producer Demonstration Site. So it's a research mechanism where all the work is done on farms with farmers. So we just want to acknowledge, obviously, straight up all the efforts from the collaborating farmers. None of this work happens without them, and also Charlie Wooten, who was an honours student that did a big chunk of this work when he was at Adelaide Uni, now at Jigsaw Farms. Some really great people that we got to work with, and then I guess the idea is to work out where the optimum is for managing those 19-month-old ewes. I guess Amy will go through it, but there's never research trials done on research farms with perfect paddocks and stuff, or you have nice replicated experiments. In PDSs, sometimes it's less so. You've got different combinations anyway. So the data is not a perfect data set, but it has shown some really good, some clear messages, we think, that we can sort of go forward with and allow us to sort of, I guess, manage our maidens a bit better, or know that where the economic optimum is for that. So I think that's probably enough for me, Amy, if you're happy to take over. Amy's over in WA, so maybe I can introduce Amy. So Amy did a PhD in the lamb density stuff. So so she undergraduate through Murdoch and PhD through Murdoch University. A lot of work around mob sizes and the impacts on lamb survival. Big passion for sheep reproduction, like most of us in the group, is now works for us in WA, manages Merino Tech breeding program on behalf of their board and us, and does some of this project work as well. So thanks, Amy. I'll let you take over.
Perfect. Thank you, Ferg. So I think Ferg's already touched on most of the content of this screen. Essentially, we knew that the scanning percentage of maidens is about 20% lower than that of adult ewes, and so looking to close that gap and increase the reproductive performance of the maidens. The current target, or the existing target for maiden ewes, is to be at 75 to 80% of standard reference weight by 15 to 17 months of age, and obviously to achieve that they need to be preferentially fed to meet those targets. So again, the aim of these PDS sites was to demonstrate the impacts of adopting best practice or best bet management for reproductive performance of maidens, to update the best bet guidelines based on the findings from the PDS sites, along with the economic analysis that's been conducted, and to work with producers to help improve their skills and knowledge around the reproductive performance of maiden ewes. So just to go through the results from the producer demonstration site. So firstly, the design of the sites. So we had 5 sites involved in the project. At each of those sites, we had at least 400 maiden merino ewes, so joined at 19 months of age, and they were randomly allocated into 2 mobs. One was a normal management group, so they were fed as per traditional management for maidens on that farm. So that had at least 200 ewes. And then we had our best bet group, which were fed about 30% more energy and protein than the normal group throughout joining. So those differential nutrition between those two groups ceased at the end of the maiden joining. So the data that was collected, so for the maidens, they were weighed before joining, and then they were weighed and condition scored when the rams went in and when the rams came out. And they were also weighed and condition scored at their second joining at about 2.5 years of age. Individual pregnancy scanning records, so single, twin or dry, were recorded as a maiden, and then at the second joining when scanned at about 3 years of age. So we had 2 demonstration sites in Western Australia, 2 in Victoria and 1 in South Australia. So we captured a fairly broad range in geographical regions, as well as different merino genotypes. So these are the results at the maiden joining for each of the sites. On average, the ewes in the best bet groups gained more weight before joining, and across the 5 sites, they were on average 1.8 kilos and 0.1 of a condition score higher at joining, and they also gained more weight through the maiden joining compared to the normal group. So that improved nutrition did pay off. And on average, the ewes in the best bet group had higher conception rates and scanning percentages than those in the normal group. So the statistical analysis had a look at the effects of joining weight and condition score, along with weight gain through joining on the scanning outcomes. So what we found was that ewes that were heavier and in better condition score at joining, and that gained more weight through joining, were more likely to achieve higher conception rates. And these effects were greater when ewes were joined in poorer condition score and when they were lighter. So you can see in the figure on the left-hand side, the thick lines are where the ewes are gaining 100 grams per head per day throughout joining, and the thin lines are where they're losing 100 grams. The yellow is condition score 3 and the black is condition score 2. So you can see that benefit of gaining weight throughout joining, as well as being in better condition score and being heavier. So for scanning percentage, we again saw ewes that were heavier, in better condition score, and that gained more weight through joining were more likely to achieve higher scanning percentages. And that's obviously because more were scanned with twins and less was scanned dry. So again, in the yellow is condition score 3, black is condition score 2, and the thicker line is where they're gaining 100 grams per head per day, and the thinner line is where they're losing 100 grams per head per day.
Everyone following? Anyone got any questions?
Cool. So these are the results at the second joining, so when they were joined at about 2.5 years of age. So at this time point, we saw no difference in the condition score or weight of ewes in the best bet or normal group, which we would expect given that the differential nutrition ceased at the end of that maiden joining. But we're basically looking to see if there were any carryover benefits of that better nutrition in the maiden joining. So we've had a look at condition score and weight at joining, along with the pregnancy scan as a maiden. And what we found was that ewes that were in better condition score at their second joining were more likely to conceive. There was no effect of joining weight. These 3 lines represent a different joining weight. So grey is 50, 70 in the black and 90 in the yellow. So no significant difference between those lines, but better condition score resulted in more lambs being conceived. And for scanning percentage, we had significant effects of joining weight and their pregnancy scan as a maiden. So ewes that were heavier were more likely to be scanned with twins and less likely to be scanned single or dry. So the heavier achieved high scanning percentages. And ewes that were scanned as a twin, as a maiden, were more likely to be scanned with twins at their second joining compared to ewes that were scanned as a dry, as a maiden. So in the figure, this is when we're joining our second joining ewes at condition score 3. So you can see the benefit of being heavier at joining, and then the benefit of being a twin is that yellow line versus the single as a black line and the dry as a grey line.
So it's about a 25% advantage those who scan twin as a maiden scan 25% higher, or whatever that is, 22% higher in their following joining.
Attempt, yep. So the economic modelling had a look at the optimal nutrition targets for maiden and merino ewes, and this was conducted by Michael Young from Farm Optimisation Group, and it used Australian Farm Optimiser, which is a whole farm optimisation model. The modelling was based on a typical farm in southwest Victoria, so with the features in that table on the left-hand side, but we can expect that similar conclusions can be drawn for enterprises in other regions or with different times of lambing. So this is a 60 kilo standard reference weight. So the economic modelling has shown... Sorry,
maybe just a bit of a definition of AFO. So some of you'll be aware of John Young's work. Michael, who runs Farm Optimisation Groups, John Young's son, obviously must be genetic, doing economic analysis. But yeah, so AFO is, well, in our mind anyway, the best sort of bioeconomic model getting around, and its job is to optimise. So you change parameters and then it optimises the stocking rate, feeding, all that sort of stuff to maximize profit. So it's a really good optimization model that aims to, if you give it the parameters, so we feed it in the new parameters that we found in the project, and it'll feed out what whether that made money or lost money and the profile. I guess in our project we had obviously those 2 treatments across each of those farms, but essentially we then analyze within those treatments the animals. I went back to a sort of an animal basis, and then we can kind of look at those response curves and put them into AFO and then predict the economics out of that. And it's kind of an approach we've used for 20 years or so, and like all of the work is pretty much all the repro work in Australia has been kind of ground truthed in AFO, and all the new work that happens gets fed into that model. So every project, and this one's added to it again, makes that model slightly better. So it's a really good, I guess the best estimate of what's happening on farm, and then of any model that's getting around there. Sorry, Amy.
Thanks, Ferg. So the economic modelling has shown that optimal nutrition targets for maiden merino ewes are to join at 96 to 98% of standard reference weight and to maintain weight during joining. So the profitability of is sensitive to these targets. So if we're joining ewes heavier and maintaining weight through joining, that generally leads to better returns. So in the graph there on the left-hand side, you can see at 97 to 98%, which are the grey and the black, the green and the black lines, we've got the best profitability per ewe joined. And profitability can decline sharply once we've exceeded standard reference weight, and that's because of the inefficiency in weight gain when ewes are in higher condition. So if you are currently using best practice guidelines, so that's assuming that you're using guidelines like lifetime ewe management, then these new targets are projected to increase whole farm profit by 0.5%, income per ewe by $4.90, and weaning rates by 10%. And this improved reproductive performance allows for a 2.1% reduction in the number of ewes joined and a 0.5% reduction in stocking rate. So as Ferg was saying, those traits are flexible so that it's optimising the outcome for that scenario. So what about
we didn't have the lines of 75 to 80% or whatever the current best practice guidelines are, but yeah, essentially they're even less profitable. So yeah, I guess this is I don't know, for the first time or whatever. But anyway, it has shown that that we should get our maiden ewes up to pretty much their adult weight by that 19 months of mating. Obviously, then maintaining weight through joining. If they're lighter, then it looks like from those lines that if they are lighter than that, then gaining through joining will be beneficial. And what we've always sort of known, I guess, around repro is that while live weight change is, like, we sort of think of that as flushing maybe, but actually what we think's happening, or what the gurus like Tomo thinks happening, is it's just if they're gaining weight, you've got more animals that actually hit a higher live weight when the ram hits them. So it's kind of more directly related to their condition score and live weight on the day of conception rather than that actual live weight change. And I guess if you've got them either holding weight or slightly gaining, you've got more chance that they're going to be in that right weight. Thanks for your question, John. I'll just where'd I lose that? Somewhere. No, I think, well, standard reference weight is, so John's asked, slow growing merinos can take over 2 years to reach standard reference weight. If we hit that in 18 months, will they go over standard reference weight? Well, the reality is, well, good question. And my answer is that, like, standard reference weight won't change. They'll just be up to, they'll then not get, if you feed them more, they'll just get higher condition score, but their standard reference weight won't change because it's, so standard reference weight is, we should have probably clarified that, is weight at condition score 3. Live weight at condition score 3. So any extra weight you put on then goes into condition. So they might be condition score 3.5 and get heavier, but their standard reference weight shouldn't change. So it's basically, this modelling is telling us we can afford to get them up to that weight rather than let them do it over 2 years. If we speed that process up a bit through our nutritional management, it's saying that that's actually a profitable thing to do. Whereas, I guess, I don't know, you tell me, but I think historically we've kind of let the seasons or other things dictate how heavy these girls are when they go to the ram, and then we kind of fix it up in the next couple of years. Whereas, we've kind of, this is saying, well, we can afford to actually push them up and make sure they have done their growing by 18 months of age or 19 months of age, and when they go to the ram. So, good question, but that's my interpretation of what we know here, which is, and I guess this has kind of come about, has changed as we've gone. I'm showing my age now, but as we've gone from sort of like a weather dominant merino flock in when sort of reserve price scheme days to moving through to where a lot of flocks don't have any weather, so the maidens or the kind of your 12-month-old replacements became a bit of a tool on farm, or were sort of the ones that got jammed out the back while the ewes were lambing or whatever. And so I guess what this is telling us is that they need to remain a high priority. And I know that we're good at loading up our farms with high priority stock, but the economics tell us that if we can find a way to get them up to weight, then there's actually money in it. Because the good thing about doing this modelling, the economic modelling through AFO, is that it takes into account the fact that to do this, you've got to steal some feed from some older ewes or whatever. That's all part of the model. So this is not sort of, you can kind of, if you do a back of the envelope calculation, it all looks pretty because you just steal some feed from something else and feed into these and it makes money. But AFO is designed not to allow that to do that. And with some graphs coming up showing you different feed prices where it really doesn't change it. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Ferg. So what about the impact of supplementary feed cost? So a sensitivity analysis looked at modelling the cost of lupins. So the low feed cost is 25% below standard price, high feed cost is at 25% above standard price. And overall, it shows that profitability is slightly lower for each scenario when we do have higher feed costs, but there's little change in that response curve, profit response curve. So the targets remain similar, but the profitability might shift slightly. So in this sensitivity analysis, stocking rate and the amount of supplementary feed fed are not fixed. So it assumes that producers will have the capacity to adjust stocking rate either by destocking and or adjust the amount of supplementary feed fed to reach the targets. The precision sheep management project will look further into what happens to the targets if you don't have capacity to make those changes. So not a lot of impact there on feed cost to reach those targets. So overall, this producer demonstration site project has shown that improved nutrition of maiden merino ewes joined at 19 months increases their scanning percentage. So that's similar to what we've heard in the past. And that ewes that was scanned as twins as a maiden were more likely to be scanned again as a twin at their second joining. So indicates there's a carryover benefit of being scanned as a twin as a maiden on their future reproductive performance, which may have flow-on effects on culling decisions as well for dries as a maiden. The economic modelling has identified new targets for our maiden merinos, and that is to join at a weight of 96 to 98% of standard reference weight. So essentially, as Ferg said, basically getting them up to standard reference weight and to maintain weight gain through joining. Obviously, to meet these targets, we need to be regularly weighing ewes well before joining and making sure that we're adjusting the allocation of pastures or stubbles and or supplementary feeding to achieve these targets and therefore to optimise reproductive performance and the profitability of maiden merino ewes. Is there any further questions?
I got a statement, not a question, but I guess we've so that graph which shows those twins having scanning better, and that so if I scan a twin as a maiden and they scan more, scan again higher conception in that second joining, and so we're making in the economics we've made the assumption that that's just weeding out the sort of more reproductive sheep. There's another potential scenario where if you, like say we fed to achieve whatever 60-70% twins in maidens, which you would in some circumstances, some genotypes, like we've made the assumption that that doesn't then, there's not some phenotypic carryover effect where if you somehow manage to get them to twin, they're more likely to twin again. So if that's true, then the economics of feeding will go through the roof. Like if it was a phenotypic change that were a sort of fixed environmental change that you achieve, which so we're saying that at the moment we're assuming that's not the case, but we are going to investigate that further with the PSM, the Precision Sheep Management Project, and other work to make sure, because that'd be really cool. Like if you could justify getting them really heavy and heaps of twins on board because somehow that changes them, like some fixed environmental effect. That's unlikely to be the case. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that we're assuming that all we're doing there, all we're showing there is essentially that the more fertile or fecund sheep are picked out by essentially that scanning result tells us which ones are more likely to twin throughout their life. And that kind of lines up with what we know. The kind of high variability around reproduction, but it is quite repeatable. So anyway, just wanted to clarify that. There's another version of this analysis which kind of has and it's been reflected in some other data we've looked at, where the sheep that scan twin as a maiden are less responsive to live weight in that next year, so they're kind of more likely just to twin again regardless of what live weight you land them in, and again that's probably reflecting their genetics. And so there's a couple of different analyses that have showed that the dries and the singles in that first mating are actually more responsive to live weight than what the twins are, and again that would kind of confirm that you've got some sheep that are just naturally likely to double ovulate and have twins and some that aren't, and but anyway, those kind of things are things that we need to further investigate with a bit more, I guess, data around it, but they'll be interesting. Tim Goal asked any particular time for supplementation, first 6 months or 6 months leading into joining. I don't know if we had that in the data, Amy. I don't think we did.
No, I think the economic modelling was looking at post-weaning growth path, but obviously the supplementation for this project was sort of the few weeks before the rams went into when the rams came out. So looking at nutrition at joining.
I think what we've shown, Tim, is probably that, like, because there's no live weight change effect essentially, or not as strong as the absolute weight, you'd put it on whenever it's cheap. So you'd put on, so when you had grass, or when you had cheap pastures, when you put on as much weight as you can, and then obviously the less you have to do with the grain trailer, the better off your economics will be. So well, potentially, as long as you have to drop stocking weight to do that. So I think what it's telling us is get that weight on whenever you can, or whenever it's cheap. I think, which is different to maybe a ewe lamb or hogget, ewe hogget mating, where you don't have any time, so you pretty much got to go flat out. Whereas this, you've got a window, and I guess what we're sort of suggesting is and what we'd love people to do is kind of have that target of whatever standard reference weight is in the ewes set at when rams go in, and have that line drawn between then and weaning weight, and then weighing them frequently to kind of work out whether you're behind or above, behind the line or above the line, kind of watching the worm in cricket really. I think that's kind of, I think in my mind at least, you're very unlikely to nail this target without actually weighing something, and sort of semi-regularly weighing them, which I think probably doesn't happen that much. Elise has asked, does the economic modelling take into account the genetic gain benefit from getting more lambs from your youngest ewes? And that is a no, I'm assuming, Amy?
Yeah, not as far as I'm aware.
No, so we haven't. Yeah, so there is an additional benefit of getting more lambs out of your maidens, which is that, in theory, if you're buying good rams, then and selecting ewes appropriately, then your youngest sheep should be obviously best genetics. So, yeah, we haven't taken that into account, and I think that's certainly something that can override the economics of hogget mating or ewe lamb mating, even though some time there's lots of years and lots of time where that might not be a general economic, like might not actually make sense in a commercial scenario, but it would if you're breeding rams because you get value added genetic gain. So, so no, the economic modelling. So that's an additional benefit, Elise. I don't know. Can you answer John's question?
No, I'm not actually sure. I think that's just part of the general assumptions of the AFO model, which we didn't go obviously too much into that for this.
There is.
Analysis.
I'm not sure what Michael has modelled, but there's options of kind of when you turn those weathers off. I think if that wasn't something we were studying, it would have sold them. The model would have sold them at the most profitable time. And again, and I guess probably the important thing here is not to get too tied up in the absolute number of $95 a head, and everyone wondering how the hell I make that sort of profit per year, versus just the relativity, I suppose, that, I mean, the economics that the youngs use will be as good as there is, but I think in all these economic analysis, it's important just not to get too tied up in exactly what the number is, and more about there's more money in that line than the other line, I suppose, and sounds like a bit of a cop out, but I think every absolute obviously just as 100% dependent on the assumptions, and they'll differ between different scenarios. Slides. So this recording will be up, Graham, so we can put them up. did do a literature review. I don't know if we didn't. I think what we might have been before you came on, but there hasn't been a lot of work in the 90-month-old mating shed. Like, there's heaps of adult work, heaps of ewe lamb work, but this age group, in the literature, there's not actually much work that we could find that sort of separates out this age group specifically. And they do, well, I guess they've responded slightly differently in this project in terms of the slope of the line and stuff. So that's why the model has changed accordingly. So
there has been a few studies that have looked at, I guess, conception rate and scanning percentages of ewe lambs versus traditional maidens versus adults, and do show that obviously the maidens are somewhere in between the ewe lambs and the adults, which is sort of consistent with what we've seen in this study. So most of the poorer performance of maidens has been because of lower reproductive rates or scanning percentages, but there is also a poorer lamb survival is also contributing to their lower reproductive performance. But as Ferg said, there's not a huge amount of studies that we've been able to base ourselves off.
Good question, Ollie, on mothering as a maiden. Did we have survival differences to weight? No, because we didn't do.
No, we didn't look. Yeah, didn't look at lamb survival in this PDS.
Yeah. So we need. And I guess that's some future work that we need to hook into, is understanding those additional things. I don't know what this might be anecdotal, might have been proven, don't know, but I guess we see that kind of ewe lambs, ewe hoggets seem to behave pretty well as mothers, and then maidens still act as crazy teenagers, and then adults kick back in again. So, but yeah, I think it's interesting that, well, in my head at least, that like if you look at the Romney population here in New Zealand, the gap between a two-tooth and a kind of traditional maiden and a mixed age lamb is much closer than what our traditional, or what our merinos are. So that's I don't know what else I've got to say about that, other than that's intriguing. That means we must be able to close the gap, I suppose, because they probably started from a lower base as well. I mean, they did start from a lower base not that many decades ago. So yeah, I think probably closing that, there is a significant amount of wastage in our maiden sort of delivering us 20 or 30% less lambs, and that is right from conception through to lamb survival. And yeah, we need to look at that survival stuff. That's a bit rough, Graham asking me specifics, but I think it's down less than 10%. I don't know, any Kiwis want to back me up? Like, it's a pretty tight, there's almost, well, I think a very small gap between a two-tooth and a four-tooth, six-tooth. I don't know if Dean or Ben want to back me up. They'll probably, Ben will leave me at a dry, but
I'll leave you hanging out to try food.
Thanks, mate.
Don't really know. It's probably changes on different systems and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of them will get those two just up closer to that mature weight.
Yeah. As you get more twins from maidens, you get more lambs, a lot of weights, making them hard to get to weight. My first answer is yes, Elise, that the model will have taken into account the fact that, in fact, it does take into account the fact that those twins cost you more money than we think, and are harder to finish. I'd be fairly confident that AFO would have sorted that out. Thanks, Dean. So best Dean's seen is 7% less from two-tooth than mixed age. So so fairly, and maybe there are merinos out there doing that. I don't know, but it seems like they more consistently close the gap. John, you mentioned the variety genes. I looked at. Yeah, right, John. Yeah, so there will be. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like, what were the genotypes? So we had, range. It was obviously just whatever the farmers had. So, probably not something I would describe as you've described yours. We probably didn't have any that were kind of real wool cutter driven sheep. So, and yeah, they would definitely be slower growing or slow maturing. Yeah, it'd be interesting how that would change the economics. I guess in that genotype, making assumptions here, but if you're running that genotype, maybe reproduction isn't, maybe wool production or wool per hectare is a higher driver of your profit than kilos of lamb per hectare. So maybe this isn't a priority for you anyway. That's making some assumptions, but I guess maybe.
I guess even if you can't get them up to the target, there are still benefits there of having them at a higher percentage of their standard reference weight than being at 70% or what the current recommendation is. So even if you can't get them to 96, it might still be profitable, or the payoff there to get them up to even 85 or 90%.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Is the Aussie profit model valid for New Zealand? Well, no, I guess I think maybe yes is part of the answer, but no, it's not. So it's using grain to fill the gap, whereas often in New Zealand you would fill the gaps at a different time of the year, and you would fill it with some sort of crop. Obviously some grain maybe, but typically it's a winter feed gap rather than a summer feed gap, and it's filled by growing something that is a high density feed, and then break feed obviously. But both of those things are expensive things to do. So I think I'm not confident that the result would be different, but I am confident that the model is very different. So a bit of baleage, silage, Graham, yep, for sure. But often that would be fed in addition to crop of some description. And again, the Kiwi grazers online can tell me better than that. But so there is conserved fodder, but typically the bulk of that feed is, well, in addition to crop. So I think both. I think I'm agreeing. I think we're agreeing, Graham. I think both models are. Both feeding grain is expensive, feeding crop is expensive, feeding silage is expensive compared to all of those compared to pasture. We haven't modelled it properly, Ben, but I can't see why it would be any different. But and certainly, I don't know, anecdotally, that seems the people that get their maidens up to good weights don't seem to be going broke. That's a pretty loose bit of science.
So this QR code on the screen will take you to our post-project survey. So it would be really appreciated if you can go through and fill it out. I'll also email through the link, but just to help us evaluate how useful this project has been for you. And so MLA can also determine, evaluate PDS projects and their benefit to you as producers or consultants.
Yeah, I guess just to reiterate that, obviously all of this stuff is funded by, or partially funded by levy funds out of MLA, out of Australia. So if you could take a few minutes to fill that out, that obviously is an important part of, as everyone knows, we don't get research dollars for nothing. We have to justify that they've been valuable or not, either way. So if you could take a moment, that would be appreciated. But any other questions or comments? So I guess this was a merino, all merino sheep. So there's, and I guess in non-merinos, it's typically a ewe lamb versus like that's the focus comes a year earlier almost often with those both most shedding breeds and your crossbred sheep, Romneys, composites, whatever. Like you're often joining ewe lamb, so it's kind of like the 19-month-old maiden's probably less of a focus in those systems. So we're definitely focusing on the merinos, but we have done lots of work on that ewe lamb stuff as well. But anyway, we'll we'll hang around for another 15 and answer any questions, but just quickly take the opportunity to thank Amy for all her hard work, and again thank all our collaborating farms and Charlie Wooten for their efforts. And thanks for coming along this evening.
If I got it correctly, there didn't seem to be much advantage in putting condition on maidens at mating. Is that how I read this or not?
As in continuing to put weight on after.
Once they're at the standard reference weight, there's no advantage in gaining additional condition on them.
That's what it's telling us. Yeah. Yep.
And am I correct in remembering you putting up a graph that condition score is highly correlated with scanning percentage historically? Has this changed that thinking?
No, so it's condition score, and I guess the problem is you can't, with our analysis, you can't put condition score and live weight in the same model because they kind of knock each other out. And I'm hoping Amy's agreeing with me. So this is not saying that condition score is not as good as weight. It's saying that live weight change or condition score change through joining isn't an economic thing to do, or and so we're having live weight or condition score, both are the same thing essentially, in a young sheep, is a good thing. So the heavier they are or the higher the condition score are, the more they'll conceive. And what the economics tells us is if you get them to their standard reference weight, that's where the optimum is roughly, or just under. And if you go over that, then you've wasted feed essentially. Well, not wasted feed. They'll have more lambs, but they will cost you more than they're worth.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So we are interchanging condition score and live weight kind of in our heads, and
in this analysis we did have an interaction between live weight and condition score. So we looked at a few different models. We couldn't run with standard reference weight because it was too closely collinearity between joining weight and standard reference weight in the data set. But basically it was saying that ewes that were joined lighter and in poorer condition were more responsive to those benefits of being heavier and the better feeding through joining.
Yeah, right.
I think the answer is if you're light, like if you walk out to the paddock and it's 2 months to joining and they're 75% standard reference weight, then flat out is the answer. Whereas if you're already heavy, then you can kind of just maintain.
Then the model's working on profit rather than actual scanning percentage as well.
Yeah, so it's trying to optimize profit. Yeah,
on those sort of things.
And the reason we chose Southwest Victoria is because it doesn't have a cropping overlay and stuff. So like there's different models obviously, and like the ones in the other models have a kind of cropping overlay which can confuse you because like sometimes you make more money just because you take some stocking rate put some more crop in because you run less sheep, changes the economics. So it's pretty hard to read, whereas at least Southwest Victoria is a sheep dominant system.
Okay.
And it's where all sheep are in Australia, but almost.
Yeah. And you did have a question around the heavily walled sheep and whether there'd be a difference in that. Have you got any thoughts on, whether different genetic profiles, the flocks would respond differently to the profitability around this, or you think it's a reasonably comparable across a range of different genetic types?
Yeah, I don't know, to be brutally honest, but I think I don't know whether, like, if you go for if you had a whole flock that had a weaning rate breeding value of 0.35 or 0.4 or something, are they, what does that do? Would they have more that twin as a maiden? So then, but still, it'd be the only reason that would be different if we see that interaction between sort of genetics of reproduction and their live weight, which I kind of can't. I'm racking my brain, but can't think of seeing anything like that. Where, like, if high reproductive genetics become less responsive to live weight because they're just going to have twins anyway, then that would be, then genotype would have an effect. But we kind of still see this in every genotype we play with, from Romneys to composites to whatever. We see a response to condition score and live weight for conception. So while those lines might flatten, they don't disappear. So I'm not sure. I think on a systems level, like if you're running 3 and 4 year old wethers, then the economics of 5% more lambs out of your maidens would be would be hard to justify, I'm imagining, or wouldn't be. The economic value of that would be less compared to something that's where you're turning off lots of lambs. So I think the system would matter, but I don't have the data on genotype. Do you have a theory? You must have a theory.
No, I haven't got a theory. I'm just interested in that one.
Yeah.
Probably if you want to try and implement something like this in the New Zealand system, you'd have to understand the return per kg dry matter, and to get them to standard reference weight, you don't have a lot of room to errors to make in your whole growth profile in our climate to get them to that sort of weight. You've got to be pretty much on the ball the whole time. And so there's some trade-offs, and I presume the model takes that into account, trade-offs around finishing other lambs to that sort of stuff, or selling them store or whatever that makes it fit in.
It would for Western Victoria, but it doesn't. Yeah, so whether we could do the same modelling in Farmax or or equivalent. I
tend to think that the same principle is going to apply, but it's a challenge.
You need to prove it. You need to show it. Yeah, we'll need to find a way to model it. Yeah. There are examples of people that are doing this, but I don't know. There's quite a few commercial merino farmers here which would hit their standard reference weight by maiden new mating, but whether they've done the economics on that, I don't know. But
and they're just doing that off. They're not throwing a lot of grain into that, are they? They're mainly doing it off pasture or forage-based systems.
Some a bit of both, but mainly loosens and whatever, like improved pastures.
And it seems to be profitable in those systems. So it's a challenging thought.
I think the answer probably is simply as Amy sort of pointed out, that we can probably afford to do better, whether we'd have to get to do best. I think we have. The whole reason we did this project is because maidens have been second-class citizens, and I think hopefully this has shown that they can kind of step 1 or 2 rungs up that ladder. And I guess the challenge for us is working out what drops down 1 or 2 rungs on the ladder as we do that, because you can't feed everything the same. Awesome. Thanks all.
Great session, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Elise.
Thank you. I'll let you go. Get tea ready.
Thanks all. Cheers. See ya. Thanks, mate.